you able to see who's online?
Yep, Commissioner Woodward has not signed on yet. But right now, it's just staff.
I beg your pardon?
Right now, it's just staff.
Okay. Well, at this point, we're at 6 o'clock, so can you advise when Commissioner Woodward?
I will.
Thank you. So at this point in time, calling to order the Brainerd Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, July 21st, 2021. Director Chansky, could you do roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Foley. Yeager.
Yes.
Calrus.
Yes.
Woodward. Erickson.
Here.
Gorham.
Here.
And Duval.
Present. Thank you. So at this time, is there a member who would care to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I will.
Thank you. All rise, please.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So we're at item 4 on the agenda, approval or amendment of the agenda. I'm aware of one change that we will want to make. If we can strike the workshop minutes from this meeting, and we'll add those on to our meeting on August 18th to allow staff time to make some corrections to those. And I would recommend that we move new business first. We have 2 conditional use permit requests before us, and then move to old business. So those are 2 I'm aware of. Are there any other changes to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, just want to let you know that Commissioner Woodward has joined us virtually.
Thank you, and welcome, Commissioner Woodward.
no changes, and recommend approving, motion to approve as recommended by the chair. Yeager.
I will second it.
And Gorham, second. Any discussion? Move to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
roll call.
Mr. Chair, as we do have one
Excuse
virtual
me.
member, will need to be roll call.
Roll call, please.
Yeager.
Jansky.
Yes.
Calrus.
Yes.
Woodward.
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
Gorham.
Yes.
And Duval.
Yes, all right, that motion passes. I'm going to have Commissioner Yeager be my protocol man. All right, at this point in time, then, we're at approval of the minutes of the regular meeting held on June 16th, 2021. Looking for a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
And Gorham, motion. Erickson, second. Any discussion? Hearing none, move to roll call, please. Director Chansky.
Yeager.
Yes.
Calrus.
Yes.
Woodward.
Yes.
Erickson.
Yes.
Gorham.
Yes.
And Duval.
Yes, all right, that passes. We are now moving on to new business, item 7A. We have a conditional use permit for 310 North 7th Street. Director Chansky, could you please set that up for us?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. James and April Erfurth, they have submitted a request for a conditional use permit to operate a private learning center at 310 North 7th Street. 310 North 7th Street is, as you can see in your packet, located in an R1 single-family residential district. The operation of a school or private learning center, as this would qualify as, does fall under the definition of school per the state of Minnesota, is considered a conditional use per section 515-54-5.f of the Code of Ordinances. The purpose of this center is to be used as a satellite location for elementary age homeschool students that formerly attended their Montessori school to provide an applied learning and home economics environment. Looking at the requirements in the code for a public or private school that this would qualify as, requirements are that the site accesses a major collector. The staff recognize that this center is adjacent to North 7th and located between Juniper and Kingwood Streets. These roads are not major collectors, but they do accommodate any traffic in relation to the operation of the center, and they are also only 2 blocks from Trunk Highway 210 as well. The site, requirement number 2 is that the site is landscaped according to section 20 of the zoning code. According to section 515-20-8.b, be at least a 6-foot high fence or landscape screening, providing 80% year-round capacity should be required wherever a non-residential use abuts directly upon land zoned or used for residential purposes, or is across an alley from land or used zoned for residential purposes. The owners have applied for and have been issued a permit to construct a 6-foot wood privacy fence that would screen their yard from the street and the neighboring property to the north. There is no required parking lot screening, as they do not actually have a parking lot. And the property currently meets all other landscaping requirements. Off-street parking is, third requirement is that off-street parking is provided in accordance with section 22 of the zoning code. And the site has a parking area off the alley that is sufficient for staff. Students that attend the center do not have any parking needs. And also, if you go into the parking section of the zoning code, that's section 22, that actually, when it comes to elementary schools, have been exempt from any off-street parking requirements as well. The fourth requirement is that off-street loading and service entrances are provided as regulated in section 23. The staff's comment is that the site does not receive large delivery shipments. Anything delivered from the site would be similar to surrounding residential uses. And the final requirement is that emergency vehicle access is provided to and within the site. And the site has emergency vehicle access from North 7th Street and the alley, which is sufficient for the lot of its size. The final finding of fact that staff submitted is that Mr. Firth is currently working with the state of Minnesota for licensing and the Brainerd building official for occupancy and building codes. This would be a change in use per the building code, so it'd be going from a residential use to what they call an E, an educational use. And because of that, a new certificate of occupancy would be required to be issued. So following things like health and safety, ADA, accessibility, those are all things that they would have to meet in order to be issued their certificate of occupancy by the city, and they have engaged the building official for those requirements. City staff did receive comments from a number of parties who contacted the community development department with questions about the project. Some concerns that were discussed regarding there were number of students allowed on the site, hardwiring of smoke alarms, ADA accessibility, again, things that would be covered through the building department and commercial building standards, all the things, again, that would just be required from the building official to be issued a certificate of occupancy for this use. Staff's opinion is that we recommend approval of the certificate of the CUP application contingent upon meeting all requirements from the state of Minnesota and the city of Brainerd building official. And I'll take any questions that
Thank
the
you,
commission has,
Director
Mr. Chair.
Are there any questions of clarification of the staff before we move to public hearing?
Mr. Chair, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Mr. Chansky, are you aware of any similar uses in the community, any precedents that something like this?
As in, if a home has been used like this,
Yeah, something in the neighborhood.
in this manner, not to my knowledge. Again, this could be done as a home business. The reason that the first are going this direction for a conditional use permit is that to have a home business license, it would be required that it be your primary residence, and that only 25% of the total floor area be used for this business. This location is not their primary residence. That's why they're going the route of the CUP. If you wanted to see something that might be similar to this, a use that might be similar to this would be, when you're talking about intensity, would be, I would think, like a in-home daycare. When you're talking about the intensity of that use.
That makes some sense, thanks.
Any other questions or clarification before we move to public hearing? Hearing none, we will open the public hearing at 6:10. And at this time, we'd like to call forward the applicants, and if there are additional information that you would like to provide about your project, other than what's been read here, we'd certainly be that opportunity to do that.
No, sir, actually,
And if you could, just approach the microphone, if you would, state your name and
my name
address.
is James Herfurth, and that's my wife, April. We are the owners. of the Montessori School of Brainerd. Yeah, everything on there is exactly as we.
And your address, please?
My address is 216, 13216 Highway 18, Brainerd.
Thank you. Okay, and your points that you wanted to,
No, actually, everything is on there is just as we discussed, working with the Brainerd building, just to make sure we got everything covered, and we want to go through it again, just make sure that everything that fits for the state and for the city was fine as well.
very good, very good. And at this time, then, I would also then welcome additional individuals that would care to speak to this proposal, and if you do, if you would, please come to the podium and address your comments and questions to the chair. Is there anyone that wishes to speak on this? Yes, ma'am, please come to the podium, state your name and address.
My name is Pam Stock. I live at 317 North 7th Street. I live across the street from the applicant's property. I'm asking that you deny this application for the following reasons. This seems to be a corporation application. It's not a nonprofit. It's not a 501c3 type of application. It's a commercial business application that wants to place itself in the middle of Brainerd's historic, longest term and traditional neighborhood, in the middle of the 150th anniversary of the city. This is a single-family residential district, and under the comprehensive plan that you all modified in 2019, the housing goal was to encourage the preservation of the existing homes, and the applicant wants to bring a commercial business in the middle of one of the first blocks of traditional neighborhoods in the city of Brainerd. One of the principles of that 2019 plan was to encourage safety in the neighborhood, and to put a commercial business in the middle of it just doesn't seem to align with the traditional neighborhood values in the comprehensive plan. Also celebrating the unique neighborhood and the features that we hold very near and dear to our hearts in North Brainerd. Again, putting a commercial business in the middle of it doesn't seem to match. I believe that Mr. Chansky, I could be wrong, but that in 2019 he emphasized the importance of the comprehensive plan and the necessity of its daily usage. And I believe that was in the Brainerd Dispatch. It was a quote. He stated that the plan is a living document, and the comprehensive plan needed to be considered at all times. And for us in our neighborhood, we feel that taking this house out of being a residential unit is not fitting in with what the comprehensive plan is. It's no longer going to be a house, and to us, it ignores the traditional housing needs in our community. I was told by the applicants last fall that it was going to be used for after-school tutoring, and I read their permit or whatever they applied for at that time, and I was actually told that they were going to be living there. And so I struggled right away trying to figure out what was going on this entire last year when I saw kids there in the morning and then until the end of the day getting dropped off by parents and getting picked up by parents. So I have a real concern about also what are the lots that are really involved, trying to figure it out. I actually called Mr. Chansky twice, left messages. He finally got back to me a little after 4 today. I was working on that since last week. I could try to figure out exactly where the lots were. I mean, I understand where their house is, just from the former people that live there, but I do have concerns about that. What all is involved as far as property goes? I feel like you can't approve this CUP when it's really going to reduce. You know, a CUP, from my understanding, is meant to help to kind of reduce the negative impacts. And how do you reduce a negative impact when you just basically take this house away from being a residential dwelling? That just doesn't make sense to me. I also struck the connector street access. I don't agree. That's my opinion. I have questions about that as well. I think that there needs to be a little bit more look into that. So I would hope that the CUP, I mean, when I read it, to me it was so vague, and I don't know, what does it mean to be a home economics? Is it going to be a school that runs all day? Is it a school? Okay, anyway, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit nervous about all this. basically, the plan to preserve, protect, and enhance our traditional neighborhoods, as stated in the comprehensive plan, doesn't seem like it's going to align with what they are asking you to approve. It doesn't make sense to me at this point. I'm sorry, I'm just going to look through a few more of my notes. And I guess I'm wondering, you did talk a little bit about zoning ordinance would need to change. So does that mean that that house ends up being, it's rezoned? And so then if they were to leave that at some point, is it rezoned? Is it then some sort of a commercial property? And then, here we are, what is the value, what happens to our homes, our residential homes? And I'm just going to ask, think about if it was you in your neighborhood, how would you feel about this? We haven't really been, I know it's not probably our business to be told what's really going to be happening at the center. Wonder about how many kids. I don't know that, I suppose that probably doesn't really matter when it comes to whether or not you approve this CUP or not, but I guess in the neighborhood to us it matters. I guess I ask that you not support the application at this time. I ask that you required this space conform to all state standards. I believe that Mr. Chansky did mention that. And what's the long-term plan? Really, what's the long-term plan? What's going to happen? It just doesn't feel like it is protecting our traditional neighborhoods in North Brainerd. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would care to speak to this application? Yes, sir. Come on up to the podium, state your name and address, and direct your comments to me.
My name is Michael Rousseau. I live at 307 North 7th Street, which is kind of kitty corner from the piece of property that we're discussing. And I have the same concerns that she just stated. And one of the real concerns I have is traffic. We're already congested. And I never realized how bad it was until I retired. And now I have more time to be outside and looking around my neighborhood. And I would venture to say there's anywhere from 150 to 200 cars a day that pass up and down that street. It's a thoroughfare. And I'm glad that the Whittier School is being used again as a school, and I think that's the right place to put a school. But to take and literally destroy our traditional neighborhood, which the city says they want to protect, I have a hard time agreeing with that. And I think if you were in our shoes, you wouldn't want it in your backyard either. And like I said, I've been in my home for over 50 years. I've seen a lot of change, and there's a lot of rental property in that area, which also creates more traffic. And the biggest problem we have is off-street parking, and they do not have ample off-street parking. They have 2 stalls there, that's it. So I hope you would follow through in what you really believe as a planning and zoning commission to protect our traditional neighborhoods, especially this one of the oldest in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that care to speak to this application? Hi there.
State your name.
If you'll state your name, please, and your
Hi,
address.
I am Abe Erfurth. I am the son of April and James Erfurth, and also a student at the school. And we have learned a lot about this house and how it works. So we know what happens in a house, and we know what it goes through and what we have to do to maintain it.
Thank you.
My name is Levi Hamley. I have been at the schoolhouse for quite some time. I do not agree with some of what the other people have to say. We, as students, have learned a lot about what the house has gone through and how it can serve as a house and school as well.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Reef Sampson, and I agree with both of them.
Thank you. Yes, you may. Please approach the podium. Again, state your name and your address.
I'm Jessica Sampson, and I live on 15264 Riverside Street, or Road, I guess, in Brainerd. And a lot of the people are speaking of destruction, and this is not a destructive process that is being promoted here. It's a positive atmosphere. It's a small, community-based, altruistic atmosphere. So from a standpoint of destruction, that is not what is going on at this school. You know, we've known the Urfers since my son Reef was 2. They are extremely good people. They're very kind and considerate people, and I don't think that this is a commercial business. They do not want to make this a commercial business. This is a family-run, family-based organization that, you know, if you had a daycare in a home, there'd be a lot more commotion, you know, potentially destruction. These kids are respectful kids. And the benefit, I think, of having them down there definitely is present. So they kept speaking of destruction, and there's no destruction here. If anything, there's maintenance of it. So yeah, I'm obviously for the school and for the learning of our children, and you know, where we choose to want to have our kids educated is our decision. If we want to have them in a private school, if we want to have them in a public school, if we want to have them in a home school. You know, we all pay taxes regardless of where they're at school. And yeah, I'm in support, so thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would wish to speak? Thank you. If you'd state your name and address and direct questions
Sure.
to me.
Hello, my name is Shannon Himley. I live at 8073 Travis Trail in Brainerd. Just to provide a little bit of background for you, the children at the Montessori receive tutoring services, and both of my children have attended the Montessori since they were 3 years old. I think that this actually would provide a wonderful opportunity to expose some of the children to the historic properties that we have in our community. What better way for them to become aware of that and see all that that has to offer. Also, the school met a community need during the pandemic, and they continued providing supervision to the children while many of their parents were continuing to offer critical services in our community at a time when we would not have been able to had they not been doing what it is that they were doing. I also think that it's pretty apparent that you can see how well-behaved the students here are sitting in a official government meeting. It speaks volumes to what it is that they're learning while they're at school and while they're at home. And I think that given the pick of multiple neighbors, I would choose them over many others. And I have no doubts that the Urfers and the students would strive to be superb neighbors and would welcome any open communication with the neighbors that are in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir. If you would come up to the podium, state your name, address, and address your comments to the chair.
Good evening. I'm Al Gardner. I live at 317 North 7th Street, across from the property we're talking about. The word destruction is taken out of context. No one's talking about any destruction in the neighborhood. What we're talking about is the destruction of the financial integrity of the neighborhood. We all pay taxes, but they're paying taxes the same as me, and they have a business. So why are they paying the same tax as me but having a business? That's one point. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the fence. So we have to change the property. So we're putting up a 6-foot fence, but it was not mentioned about the house to the south of this, of the house in question. It's a 6-foot difference between the two houses. So you're going to put a 6-foot fence up in an area where it's basically, I don't know, it's not going to be much for that person on the south side to have a fence 3 feet from their window now. I don't think that they would appreciate that. So that would be, to me, that's destroying someone's, their private, living space. But the other question, the other point I wanted to point out was, Mr. Chansky said precedent. There's no precedent in Brainerd, Minnesota for this type of situation. Yes, it's a historic house. I agree you could learn how to live or how a house functions and stuff, but are you not learning that at home in the house you're currently in? Do you need another house to go learn how to live in a house? I don't understand that. And so the other question I have, or point I wanted to make out, was if this is considered a school, which everybody says they're a student of, and how are we going to protect those kids if there is a fire? Is this house going to have a big, huge fire escape for the second floor for them to get out? If you have a 6-foot fence up, what if there's an emergency? How you're going to have to get through that fence somehow? And I just don't. I guess those are my points. Those are the questions that I have, and I'm hoping that the council will take it into mind that this is basically an inroad into a neighborhood with businesses, which has been taking place along this stretch, or this part of North Brainerd, of the North neighborhood. The businesses are slowly kind of creeping in because somehow they're being able to find a financial way of getting in there. So do we let businesses go all the way to Gregory Park then? And then we have more traffic that's uncontrolled, and the problems we have now. We just had an accident at the corner, a block away from the location we're talking about, and there was children playing at the time. Could have been hurt, but they weren't, thankfully. But that's just because there's a park there. So our collective street can hardly handle the traffic we have now. So if we start putting more businesses into the area, I don't, we're going to lose the value of a neighborhood right there, and especially the one that's probably one of the first sections of this town that was ever put up. So again, I'm asking the council to deny this CUP and help them find a different place for the business that they want to run. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would care to speak on this application? Is there anyone else who would care to speak? Yes, ma'am. If you would state your name, address, and direct your comments.
Yes, my name is Kathleen Maloney Hermerding. I live at 116 Juniper Street. I have a lot of questions about the CUP and about the use, I guess, of the property. Mr. Chansky said that there isn't precedent for this. There isn't in being used, but I've lived in the neighborhood for, almost 30 years. We have quite a few precedents of people who wanted to put businesses in the neighborhood. One example is the Fine Line, which went through a very large process, and it's a beauty shop that went through and was approved for a variance. Another one was the Rainbow Healing Center, and they had applied to put their physical therapy office into a private home on 2nd and Kingwood. That was denied. I think we, as a neighborhood, are very protective of our neighborhood because there have been inroads. As Al said previously, St. Francis has taken down many homes to expand their church, their parking, and their school. Essentia has taken down blocks of homes to expand. So every time a house comes to planning and zoning to be changed, the north side kind of gets nervous because sometimes it's approved and sometimes it's not. And then we see changes in the neighborhood. I too can understand the traffic concern over on that side. My kids went to St. Francis. The traffic literally in the afternoon lines up for blocks. And in the morning when kids are being dropped off. And that's very close to this property as well. There are not a lot of stop signs on Kingwood Street, and so there is traffic that goes quite quickly down that road. I would concur with Al when he said children can learn how to live in a home, in their house. It's how my children learned. And I have some other concerns, probably not related to planning zoning, but like Al said, as far as you're doing home ec, the fire concerns with, I'm assuming they're going to be using ovens and irons and microwaves and things that would be potential fire hazards. So I don't know that, I have nothing against Earthruths. They're lovely people. And we've enjoyed having the Montessori school there. I just don't think that this particular home, is a place for a business. If it was a home business, I don't think there'd be these folks would be here questioning. So if they want to move in, we would welcome them to the neighborhood. Or if they want to sell their home to somebody and have them run it, we would probably welcome them. But R1 is made for you to live in your house and have your business. If you do have a home daycare, you live there. That means you're up early, 5:30, 4:30 in the morning, shoveling, gardening, doing whatever you do in a home that you own. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would care to speak to this application? Yes, sir, if you would, please. State your name, address, and direct your comments.
Ray Horton, 218 Southeast 2nd Avenue, Aiken, Minnesota. So I know I'm not a resident of Brainerd, and I only wanted to add to this discussion tonight. My daughter Victoria is one of the students at the, has been this year at the this house school. This is such a unique program that our family's made the commitment to commute over from Aiken daily. In fact, it usually means 2 round trips daily, one to bring her over. Well, her other two of her siblings are at the regular Montessori school, but this is a very unique educational thing that we have, or that you have here in the Brainerd area. And like I said, I don't live here. I don't feel I'm qualified to speak specifically neighborhood concerns, but I do want this board to know this is something unique you have here with what the Erfurts are doing educationally, and it's something that is a draw for people who do live outside the Brainerd area. As I said, we make the 30-mile drive because that's how much we believe in this program they have. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would care to speak to this application? Yes.
Hello, my name is April Erfurth. James Erfurth, I'm an applicant, 13216 Highway 18, Brainerd. And I would like to speak on first just really enjoying this process. I love the children that are here, that they're learning, and this is what we're about as far as educating. And I had no idea that buying this house and providing education would also bring this education. So this is a good opportunity to see how the city is run, and to see even the people that love their neighborhood enough to come and speak about it. And it's interesting, I think when we bought the home, of course, we didn't have any idea. We wanted to provide a unique space for the learning. And I don't know that this is the time to address concerns, obviously, and maybe that, I don't know what part of the process that happens, but like stated in the agenda, how we will have fire all taken care of, that there's safety. We are not going to be on this, the second floor is not going to be used. And so I don't know that their concerns when they transfer to your decision. I think that you understand when you look at what we are doing, some of the concerns have already been addressed. But anyway, when we were looking at this and this type of education, we've been at the Montessori school, which is located in the Park Methodist Church, for over 20 years. So we really just thought this area was great, that we've always loved going to the park. The people around the church have been welcoming. Even with Gregory Parks sometimes has problems, but we've always, as a neighborhood, felt that we would always be safe in the area. And on that note too, these families that we have inside the house, they've been with us for a really, really long time. And we do not advertise this because we do not want to overload the house, not just the house, but ourselves. My husband is the main one, is the main person that is in charge in the house. And he, and as if you know, if you own a business, you're there a lot, as if it is your home. And he is there to get it, make sure things are running fine. And yeah, it is. I understand the misunderstanding because it says commercial, but it's not commercial business in the sense. Yes, we do get paid for servicing the children. We are not advertising. We do not want a lot of children here. We are not going, we want to preserve the home. Every time someone comes in, we say, this house was built in 1878. We want it to stay the same. And if the children don't preserve it, we teach them how to. As a matter of fact, we had a student, it was our table, but decided to etch into it, mindlessly with their pencil. And so now they've learned to sand that table down and have refinished it and the time it takes to do all these things. And that would happen inside the home too as well. They did yard work, they did all these things. And yes, of course we learn this at home, but as we know, it's why not continue it the day all day? And together with your peers and enjoy it. And of course they're learning these things at home too, but they get to do it in another setting in town. Some don't live in town. And we don't know necessarily how long we'll be there. We have other ideas. We want to go somewhere else. We don't necessarily want to stay, but I'm not going to say what the future holds. We don't know for sure, obviously, because we wanted to build, and of course, this is not the time to build anything. But as far as, and that's why with the COVID, we needed space. This house was beautiful. It had a yard. It had space inside, so they can do all these things. That's what drew us to the house. And we're just trying to get the paperwork together so we can proceed and the children have the stable environment that they need and the education that they are used to doing. So thank you. So obviously I ask that you approve the conditional use permit.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that care to speak to this application? Anyone else care to speak to this application? Anyone else? Yes, ma'am. Please come up to the podium. State your name, address.
My name is Jordan Benson. I live at 9622 South Lively in Brainerd. Well, I guess I want to first and foremost really express my gratitude for my children to have the opportunity to learn in this setting. There's been a lot of, instability in life right now, and this has really provided a very safe, loving environment for our kids. My husband and I both grew up in the area. My husband actually grew up 2 doors down from the building that's used as a schoolhouse right now. So we thought this was just such a wonderful opportunity to be able to learn in a, I guess, non-traditional setting. My hope is that the city can see the vitality that these children bring to the community, the youth, and more than that, just my hope is that the city can see this as an opportunity for growth, an opportunity to not only educate our kids, but provide them with a foundation, more of a foundation than I think a traditional school can provide. What better location to her. Yeah, I mean, as far as a building goes, what better use do we have than to educate our young people?
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else who would care to speak to this application? All right, thank you for your comments. Back to the commission, are there questions of the applicant? Anyone here have any comments that you would offer or questions?
Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Yeager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question for the applicant. Would it be your choice to build the fence, or would you be building the fence only because you're required to?
Actually, it is our choice to build the fence.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. Other questions?
I have
Mr.
a
Gorham.
quick question for the applicant. What are typically the operation hours, and is it a year-round operation? What's the kind of schedule?
Well, we provide, or at least we can be open, provide the ability for the parents to be able to, when they need to drop them off. So typically it's around 7:30-ish, and most kids are gone, like the normal school day, 3:30. If you have any more additional tutoring that we do, we can do that. We continue following through, but we pretty much shut down by at least 5:30 if need be. Generally, it's pretty low numbers if it happens. Year-round, no, we're just there for the school year from traditional from September to end of May. Our summer program is actually conducted at the United Methodist Church, and we continue that as their enhancement program does.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Erickson.
Question of the applicant. Two questions, really. What's the current use of the property? Did I hear correctly that you're not living there? What's the current use of it? Is it a rental?
Right now, nothing's being done yet, right? There's nothing's being, in the summertime, there's nothing going on right now.
And then you mentioned the number of students or that you hope to keep it at a minimum.
Yes.
How many students are you hoping for, and do you?
Well, it's really, it fluctuates depending on when they come and when they go. Generally from 10 to 12 is about the max that I can handle. But yeah, that would be all I would actually accept. Lower the better.
Thank you.
I was gonna also, just to clarify on the fence, and you might notice that in what we requested and had already been approved with the fence, it's not on what the concern was. It is not on the south side at all. So it's not, the houses are very close, and we have no need to put a fence there. It's really obviously for safety of the children, and yeah, just so that we have a fence. But I don't know how easily accessed the community is to someone when they request a permit, let's say, a fence. So they might not realize that it wouldn't be on the south side. And traffic also, again, we rarely park at all on 7th Street. They go through the alley, and they don't even park. The children are old enough, and so the parents come in through the alley, and they hop out, and then they're off. So there is no parking that needed on 7th Street for sure. And the rare occasion when they do park, it's usually at random times, and there's plenty parking in the back, which would be the east side of the building, to clarify.
And if you would, please, maybe it'd be more convenient for you to stand.
Oh, sure.
Mr. Erfurt as well.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other questions? Do you have follow-up at all, Mr. Erickson?
Actually, I do have one more. Just it says here in the application or in the memo here that it's intended for homeschool students, former students of the Montessori school. Is it only former students, or could there be others?
Randomly here and there, but we found that doesn't work. Because we were in the Park Methodist Church with this group. With COVID, there was a greater need. Again, that's why we went to the house. And so at that time, they were former students, but they came, they decided to homeschool. We've homeschooled our 3 children. And so, and then, of course, we've been doing this program, which is kind of based on homeschooling. So we educate the parents sign up as homeschoolers. So they're still doing things at home, and we're also supplementing that schooling. And,
But yeah, to your question, we're focused on the Montessori families.
yes, yeah.
Most of our, and how this came about is our first, you could say the first satellite, expansion from our Montessori school was the Discovery Woods with Courtney Neifert. And they wanted us to expand into an elementary, but it was just for the private school. It's just really too expensive. So she went towards the charter school process. So Discovery Woods Montessori is kind of a child of ours that kind of grew up. And this is kind of the next segment where they wanted more of a closer than a broader approach. And so we're just offering that for ourselves too, for our children, and for the families around there. So it's really kind of a tailored towards those families.
Thank you.
Do you know what modifications to the house would be required to meet the standards for the Department of Education?
Yeah, at this time, there's no requirements. The only restrictions that we agreed on was the fact that for fire, for upstairs, which we don't really have any need to use upstairs. But for everything else, it fits into the, at least far as our research. For the schooling, a first floor does not require any fire suppression systems unless you're having a second story, and the regress takes it down to, I think it's 2 or 3 regress. And right now we have, regress 1, we have 2 places of exits, so it's actually pretty good. Actually 3, I should say. We have 3 exits actually that comes out of that, so it's very good for that egress.
So there's no requirement or a plan to put in a sprinkler system?
No, I don't, according to
Whole
law.
house sprinkler system?
That's correct. There's no need for that.
And any other kinds of modifications to the layout of the building, or?
No, since we're trying to maintain it as a home environment, it works as is, and we want to maintain and keep the look traditional and old. We want to keep that appearance, and we do want to continue to fix up the house, so it gives it that how it was. It's an antique house. It's a great house, and eventually it'd be one of those historical monument houses since it was older than Brainerd. So that's one of the things that it's a living history house. So that's yeah, it's a great house. We love it.
Thank you. Other questions? Director Jansky?
Mr. Chair, if I may, just to go off of what Mr. Firth was saying, I did actually have an opportunity to speak with the building official this afternoon on this very matter. He did confirm that yes, the Firth would not have to sprinkle the building as long as they keep all educational operations to that first floor. If they were to go to the second floor, then they'd have to sprinkle the building. They'd have to have a chair lift, some way to ADA accessibility to the second floor. Again, anything because they have to be issued a new certificate of occupancy because they're moving to, per the building code, an E occupancy or educational occupancy. Obviously, before they could start school again in the fall, the building official would have to walk through, make sure it meets the codes for an E occupancy. The fire marshal would also be going through with him for those other life safety things as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
So this last school year, did you have kids at the house?
Yes, we did. Mm-hmm.
And it sounded like congestion issues. They go through the alley, and that didn't seem to be a problem. Was there the number of kids the most number of kids at a time? How many were there?
I think we have 10.
Okay. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions for the applicant?
One last question, Mr.
Sure.
Chair. What will happen on the second floor? Will anything happen on the second floor?
No.
Anything?
What's that? Anything?
Will anything happen?
Storage-wise?
Storage, people working there, anybody?
The upstairs is kind of tricky, and it's hard to kind of keep eyes on what kids are doing. So it's no.
So nobody will be using it at all? You won't be using it?
I don't know if we'll be. We put storage up there. We
Okay.
store stuff instead of the basement. Basement's kind of a dungeon's wet, so if we had stuff, most of the stuff is in a garage, so it pretty much stays pretty empty upstairs.
Yeah.
Our own children have gone up there, I mean, but it's not going to be a used area.
No.
That's just what I was trying to,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how much of the structure is actually going to be used. Thank you.
Yeah, downstairs,
Right.
yeah.
Perfect.
All right, other questions of the commission?
I have a question, Mr. Chair. This is Commissioner Woodward.
Thank you, Ms. Woodward, please.
Question for the applicants. Are you operating as a homeschool cooperative or as a subsidiary of the Montessori?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes. We're kind of functioning from the homeschool co-op into a subsidiary. That's kind of what we're moving into, providing that. But yes, we have all the parents are homeschooling. We're just kind of growing into a more stable applied learning environment. It's been working out quite well. So we're kind of moving into a subsidiary of the Montessori school. So we're growing as it grows.
But you're not currently connected with the Montessori? You're operating independently of them?
I'm not sure.
How do you, yeah.
You mentioned that all of the parents are homeschool parents.
Yes.
Sending their kids in, so it's operating as a homeschool co-op. Are you under the umbrella of the Montessori, or are you independent of that as a homeschool co-op?
I'm not sure. You think as an organization, homeschool co-op? It's not an
Yeah.
organized co-op, no. I guess you could say it's be a subsidiary of the Montessori school.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I have a final question.
All right, Mr. Gorham.
Are you the owners of the Montessori school? Is that-
Yes,
So
we
you
are.
own it by yourselves, just you
Yes,
guys?
that's
Okay.
correct.
Excellent, thank you.
For 15 years.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
yes. Together, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Appreciate that. David, Director Chansky, I heard some concerns about sort of the legacy of the decision, if you would, in particular referencing rezoning, and so maybe you could explain the conditional use permit and how that affects the property going forward.
Absolutely can, Mr. Chair. So the conditional use permit that is, what they're requesting is that this is, again, it's zoned in R1, single-family residential district. However, when you go look in that code, like any other zoning district, there are a list of permitted accessory conditional administrative uses. The use of a school or educational facility, as this would fit under that category, is listed as a conditional use. And what a conditional use is, and I say this with the city attorney sitting next to me, so I have some apprehension. What a conditional use is, it is essentially a permitted use that the city may put reasonable conditions on to reduce negative impact to surrounding areas. So that's where in the code, there's those, though there are specific things that the city has identified when it comes to educational uses that should be considered, the major access to major collectors, landscaping, off-street parking, off-street loading if necessary, emergency vehicle access. In addition to that, the commission, the council has the opportunity to add additional reasonable conditions as it might see fit to this request. But as it sits, it is in a way a permitted use. To deny it would require some way that it just completely does not fit in what they're trying to do. Either there's too many kids, they don't have enough, there's not enough off-street parking, they're trying to do something, they're trying to cram 200 people into a 2,000 square foot house, it just doesn't work. So those would be things that you would have to consider to deny it. That's where the conditions come into play. And then, based off of the conditions that would be applied to the conditional use permit, then the applicant would have to decide whether or not they want to meet those applications. If they choose to meet those conditions, if they choose not to meet those conditions, then they can't operate. So that's how that would work. And then they must continue to meet those conditions at all times while they're in operation. If they fail to meet those conditions any time, they would be in violation of the conditional use permit. They'd be told, you know, you have to, remember here are the conditions. If they continue to stop applying or meeting those conditions, the CUP could come back, go through a process of being revoked. Once the conditional use permit is issued, it does, speaking of the zoning piece, where people think might be rezoning, conditional use permits do follow the land. So if the first were to later sell that house, it doesn't mean it is no longer a single family home. Someone could easily buy that home from them and go back to being a single family home. What it does mean is someone else could buy that home, operate the exact same way that they do with the same conditions that are being placed without having to come back to the city for a new conditional use permit. That's what all that means. It doesn't mean it is no longer, it can never be a residential use again. It just means that if someone wanted to buy it, operate an educational facility the exact same way they are, meeting the exact same conditions that might be placed on them, they don't have to come back and get a new conditional use permit.
Thank you. Any further question of staff? Hearing none at this point, I'm going to close the public hearing at 6:57 and bring this back for discussion amongst the commission. So anyone care to start discussion? Mr. Yeager?
I'll weigh in. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the applicants and everyone that has attended here and spoke. I'm going to just kind of give you guys an idea of where I'm at on this. A conditional use, the conditional use permit allows me as a commissioner to look at a case-by-case scenario of what is being applied for. And whenever a CUP comes before me, the first question I always ask myself is, does this use globally does it fit its environment? And so I've been thinking about this a little bit, and I will say that it's my belief that when our forefathers created R1 zones, they had 4 basic uses in mind: churches, parks, homes, and schools. And this is what I believe the origin or the intent of R1 zones are. So where I'm at on this is a building filled with teachers and children seems exactly like it should be in an R1 zone. In fact, if you were standing before me asking to be in a business district, I'd be trying to encourage you to think about to find a way into a neighborhood. It just seems like a natural fit to me. I'm also encouraged that we have an applicant here that is not asking to tear down a house and build a school. They're asking to use the house for what it is and to again continue on with or to run a school type use in this residence. So with that in mind, and I am sensitive, highly sensitive to uses in neighborhoods. I live in the same neighborhood. I love my neighbors, if you're listening, probably, but I would love to have you guys on the west side of me, the east side of me, and across from my street. I would have no problem with that whatsoever. Again, I just feel like children and teachers belong in neighborhoods, and I believe that's where they're safe. I believe it just is a good fit. So for that reason, I'm going to be voting to approve this CUP, and that's where I'm at. So.
Thank you. Any other comments or discussion, items of discussion here?
I've got a couple thoughts, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Gorham, please.
All right. So first of all, every neighborhood is important. I love the neighborhood of the north side. I grew up on the north side. It'll always be in my heart. But every neighborhood is important. The west, southwest, northeast, every neighborhood is important. So I don't think you can elevate the north side above any other neighborhood. And so every neighborhood is important. Every neighborhood is mixed. Every neighborhood has mixed uses. My neighborhood within the last year, a group home went in about a half block away. And would I rather have a family there? Yeah. But you know what? The group home has to be somewhere, and it's part of our community. You can't just say, I want just these people living in my neighborhood, or these people not in my neighborhood. Every neighborhood in this community is going to be a mixed neighborhood. Every neighborhood will have single family. Every neighborhood will have apartment buildings. The north side has always had apartment buildings. So in other words, every neighborhood is a mix, and you're always going to see that. I agree with Mr. Yeager that schools are meant to be in neighborhoods. They're not meant to be in business areas. They're not meant to be on commercial strips. They're meant to be in neighborhoods. I would love to see, I was asking some questions about the second floor because I'm looking at the street view picture of this house. It's like that second floor is beautiful. That porch is killer. And so it's part of me, says, gosh, there should be somebody living in there. But again, it's not for me to tell the property owners how to use the property. I don't think that's my right. It's funny because we've been also talking a lot about Kingwood Street. Kingwood Street, as we've been looking at zoning changes over the last year, has become a model to us of how we can look at this community. And the reason we picked it out is it lies in between commercial areas and a residential area. It's a classic mixed-use area. And we really it really taught us looking at Kingwood that the most important thing isn't the type of business that's in a community. It isn't, I'm this business or I'm that business. How does it fit into the community? Does it integrate well into the community? That is the most important factor. I think this will. I think this use can fit with it. And I do appreciate the people saying, well, it's not a home business. And yeah, I'd like to see families on the north side in every house. And the north side has definitely dealt with erosion over the years. I'm very sensitive to that as well. So I'm leaning towards being in favor, but I'm open-minded here. I haven't quite fully committed one way or another. But yeah, I think this could work. So I'll pass it on to others.
Thank you, Mr. Gorham. Other
Mr.
thoughts?
Chair, if I
Calvert?
may.
Yes.
I agree with a lot of what Commissioner Yeager and Commissioner Gorham have stated already. Kind of utilizing that existing property and not tearing it down is huge, I think. Utilizing what's there. The character of the home, I don't think is changed. I mean, it's that historic look. Nothing's going to be altered on the outside, it sounds like, to make it appear any different. And also, as we had a gentleman speak earlier, it brings in people from outside of Brainerd to have a unique learning center like this, to teach these life skills that are usually overlooked in a school environment. And I know as a new homeowner, when I moved in, I was pretty clueless when I moved in. So I think it's really cool to have that in our city. And then also, just kind of with it being a CUP, when it does, if you guys were to move on to a new property, a new homeowner would be able to move in, and I think that's kind of where I'm at, and as of now, I would be for approving this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Erickson?
Yeah, I've got a few comments or thoughts. First of all, I think that there's increased demand for this type of educational learning experience, educational opportunity, and so I wouldn't be surprised if we got more requests similar to this. Another comment I had was regarding the neighborhoods and then this kind of mixed use within the neighborhoods. When ISD 181 was going through the referendum process, one of my concerns was that, and I think was echoed by a lot of community members, was, there's a trend for schools to buy up big plot of land on the outskirts of town or out of town, and we would lose these neighborhood schools. The neighborhood schools was a huge part of, I think, that referendum. And, as that happened, those neighborhood schools were preserved. So I think Mr. Yeager touched on that too, the schools nestled within neighborhoods is a use that's designed for that R1. I guess further supporting that, where townships were laid out, I believe it was the 16th section of every township was set aside for a public use, often for schools. And I could be wrong about this, but I believe where the Discovery Woods School now is actually the 16th section of what was the township at the time. So I do think that it's an appropriate use within R1. And then also, last comment I had, I'm always thrilled when I hear community members cite the comprehensive plan and they're actually reading it. So it's not just us up here. So I do commend you for that. I'll also point out another area of the comprehensive plan under the community character chapter. The goal number 1 is to preserve and repurpose historic assets. And there's 6 policies under that one. There's just one that I wanted to read because I think it touches directly on this, and it says, to transform historic sites to serve today's contemporary needs through adaptive reuse. And so I think this is a perfect example of just that goal within the comprehensive plan. So I support the idea. I think, when we come up with our list of conditions, I'm in favor of. I do have a question for Mr. Chansky, Mr. Chair, if I might.
Mr. Erickson, you may.
In the application, one question I had about, I think it was the roads. Item 4 in your memo, 4A, the center must meet the following criteria as required by the aforementioned section of the code. The site acts as a major collector. That has to do with the functional classification, and I don't know that any of those are functionally classified as a major collector. Can you address that at 4A in the memo?
Looking at this again, it comes down to what was, I think, intent of when this was written. I think this was, again, written for the idea of we need to be prepared for a school. You think, again, like at Discovery Woods, they're going to come here, they're going to have 300-400 people there on a given day. So, if we're going to have 300 cars, it needs to be on a major collector. In this situation, as they're said, they're having at maximum 12 students there at a time. They come and go. It sounds like most of their people, they actually drop off in the alley. They're not even using the street. So from that perspective, it's not adding a ton of traffic to the site. Again, if they were living there, they could use it as a home business. It wouldn't matter in that perspective. And so from staff's perspective, that's where it came down to, there's immediate access off of 7th to a major collector, being Washington Street, even though North 7th isn't actually a major collector itself, and due to the low traffic volume that North 7th served the road properly.
Thank you, and then just if I could follow up on that. And then also, it sounds like the average daily, the AADA on those roads is increasing, and so perhaps in the future it would warrant an increase to a major collector. Look into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. Commissioner Woodward, I don't want to lose sight of you, even though I can't see you. Do you have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Duval. Yes, I do. I have a question for Mr. Chansky, if I may.
You may.
And Mr. Chansky, can the CUP be given with the condition that it does not pass to the next property owner?
I'm going to refer that to the city attorney, and he is shaking his head no.
Okay.
That is actually where an interim use would come into play, where then it would apply to specifically that applicant, and then it goes away. But when it comes to conditional use, it does follow the land.
Mr. Chansky, I don't know if you can answer one more question for me. Is it the Montessori school that is the property owner, or do Erfurth's own property?
I believe it is Mr. and Mrs. Erfurth who are on the title.
Okay. I am of the opinion that a homeschool co-op operating in a home is a wonderful thing. It's absolutely what our neighborhoods need right now, with the inconsistency that most kids have been having with their education. And I think it's been a huge benefit to the families that have given testimony. I know my personal family has benefited from other available resources during the last couple of years. And I think family education and schools belong in these neighborhoods. I will pass it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Woodward. I'm particularly sensitive to the concerns around the loss of a home in a neighborhood, and I think we do have a fair amount of attention to the need to maintain and increase the diversity of housing in our community. As mentioned in our comp plan, we also have a housing study that says that we have a great projected need for additional housing. Having said that, I'm thinking of this more as a temporary change in the permitted use of this particular building, this house. And, from the testimony of the applicants, there won't be any required structural changes or anything that compromise the ability of this home to be a residence in the future. But we're also seeing in our community a lot of creative uses of buildings that aren't homes. People converting churches, for example, into homes and such in this community, and there are other examples. So I feel that down the line, should the current applicants decide to sell this building or this home, there's really nothing that suggests to me that it can't be a home again in the neighborhood. So I wouldn't want to think about it as something that is lost from the neighborhood. It's the use currently that's being permitted. So I feel comfortable that we're not losing housing permanently from our community. So I want to certainly say that I hear that concern, but as I look at it, I don't see it as being a long-term loss of housing in our community or in your neighborhood. So with that, if there are no further questions or comments, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the CUP application contingent upon meeting requirements from the state of Minnesota, as well as the city of Brainerd's building official. Is there such a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Erickson, motion. Is there a second?
I'll second, Yeager.
Yeager, second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Director Chansky, can we do roll call, please?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. Erickson.
Yes.
Calroos.
Yes.
Woodward.
Yes.
Yeager.
Yes.
Gorham.
Yes.
And Duval.
Yes, that motion carries. Director Chansky, can you inform the applicant of next steps, please?
Absolutely. So this recommendation will be going to the City Council for their consideration and approval during their regular meeting on Monday, August 2nd at 6:30 p.m. at 7:30 p.m.
Very good. All right, and thank you all for your time coming out tonight and for your input, and you understand the next steps will be at the City Council. So at this point, I'm looking for moving on to item 7B. We have a conditional use permit application. Maybe what we can do is just maybe have a 3-minute recess and then come back at 7:17.
On my attorney firm, David Fishberg, my attorney firm. No need for attorney firm. That's not it? You should have done it.
Probably the most well-known voice for that. It's been sung by everyone. She's the one who really created that voice.
All right, well, I believe we're back in session here. So at this point, we're currently have before us a conditional use permit for application for 210 Northwest 5th Street. Director Chansky, could you set that up for us, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So Derek Taylor.
Before you do, just checking in, Commissioner Woodward, are you back online?
I am.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So Derek Taylor submitted a request on behalf of, actually should be Seal Tay LLC, little typo in the memo, for 210 Northwest 5th Street in Brainerd for a conditional use permit to operate an automobile dealership with associated mechanic shop. This property is located in a B4 general commercial district. In such a district, the automobile dealership with associated mechanic shop is considered a conditional use per section 515-63-6.0 of the Code of Ordinances. This does cover two parcels. Parcels number 410400723 and parcel number 410400722. The first parcel contains the actual building, would be the office, shop, and parking areas. This building was the former North Memorial, North Memorial Ambulance shop. And then the other parcel is immediately to the south, and it is currently a vacant lot. Per the Code of Ordinances, the operation of a automobile dealership with a associated shop does need to meet a number of criteria. The first being that the outdoor sales area shall be set at least 5 feet back from any property lines and at least 15 feet back from any street surface. Staff says the outdoor sales area will meet the setback requirements. The proposed new sales area will be 15 feet back from the street surface. The road right-of-way extends approximately 19 feet from the curb. So they're already, if you hit the property line already, that 15 feet, plus they have to be an additional 5 feet from that curb. From that lot line. So it'll be well more than 15 feet. The rear parking area is large enough to hold 8 cars and maintain a 5-foot setback from the alley, and sales will also occur inside of the garage. Second requirement is that outdoor sales shall be physically defined on the site by surface, curbing, landscaping, or fence barrier. The outdoor sales area will be defined by a new asphalt paved sales area and rear concrete pad. Third, that the boulevard portion of the street right-of-way shall not be used for parking or storage or display of sales items, and that it will not be, as indicated by their attached site plan. Fourth, outside sales areas shall be fenced or screened from view of neighboring residential uses or abutting residential district in compliance with Section 20. And this site is not adjacent to any residential uses or zoning. And then fifth, all lighting shall be hooded and directed that the light source is not visible from the public right-of-way or from abutting residences and shall be in compliance with Section 18 of this ordinance. The applicant is proposing 2 new light poles for the sales area. And I believe that's the new lot that's going to be paved, and the lights will be positioned on the interior portion of the sales lot and will have to meet Section 18 when they come to pull that permit. We'll review that. Another finding, the automobile repair is considered accessory use to automobile sales per Section 2. The automobile sale, the use of the building under land for the display and sale of new or used vehicles, trucks, vans, trailers, or recreational vehicles, including any major or minor auto repair or service uses conducted as an accessory use. That's the definition of automobile sales. And then finally, the city engineer must approve the parking plan and stormwater management plan prior to construction of the new asphalt sales area that's on the current vacant lot. and the Community Development Department will review setbacks and lighting fixtures prior to installation as well. We have not received any contact from anyone with questions or concerns about this proposal. At this time, staff does recommend approval of the CUP application with the stipulation that the Engineering and Community Development Departments review the new sales lot design prior to construction. Mr. Chair, I'll take any immediate questions that the commission has.
Any questions of staff before we go to public hearing? Mr. Gorham?
Just one. We've looked at lighting ordinances and things over the last year or so. Do any of the changes that we've discussed in the last year or so going to fit in this zone, or is this just kind of the commercial zone that?
So this would follow under the B4,
Okay.
which would give them that minimum, that initial minimum of a 20-foot pole with allowances up to 25 feet should they meet those cutoffs and other restrictions about it. You know, how can you see the light source from the property line and such. So they would be allowed a 20-foot pole by right.
Could we, I know you've all heard me talk too much probably already about the credit union with their new parking lot over there, and they have the motion detector lights, which I just think is such a great idea, where you keep the lights at a low level till somebody or an intruder or somebody is walking through your lot at 3 in the morning and then it gets bright. Therefore, you have security over your property, yet you keep the night sky maybe a little bit darker, although it's not exactly a rural area there. Is that anything that we could do, such as could put any stipulation? Do we have any?
I think you could consider that, you know, you potentially draft a condition.
Okay.
Again, based off of, again, how does it affect the area surrounding it?
Just a notion. Okay, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Good. Other questions of staff? All right, well, we'll go to public hearing here. Open the public hearing at 7:23. And at this point, Mr. Taylor, do you have anything to add to what was presented here already? And you're welcome to come to the podium. Introduce yourself, please, your
Derek
address.
Taylor, Sealta LLC. I really don't have anything to add other than that the light, if that were a condition of the CUP, I would have no problem with that. This 75% of our business is wholesale. The remainder is it's slight retail and exotic collector cars. So the lot really is more of a place to park vehicles that are for sale. And it's not, obviously in that location, we're not a high traffic area that we expect people driving by to see our inventory. So just wanted to say that.
A quick question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Gorham.
And that makes sense, because I'm just thinking to myself, why, if you were looking to get the average person in, why would you put a car dealership there? Thank you. You answered my question.
Okay.
Are you in the car business in generally at this point already?
Well, like I said, I've been doing this for about 40 years, and most of my business is wholesale. For about the last 5 years, I was basically riding on Midway Auto's license. So I'm my own entity. I would bring my vehicles in, recondition them, and then they would set at Midway and basically stage them. They'd have the opportunity to sell them. I did purchase the property at 1006 Washington Street, the old transmission. It was an AMCO or Kennedy transmission.
Okay.
I bought that a couple of years ago, and so that is a repair facility that we've kind of outgrown. And so those are the.
Would you be leaving that facility at 1006?
Yes, that would be the plan, yes.
Okay, good. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions for the applicant? All right. Well, at this point in time, is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this application? And Rick Chansky, I cannot see if anyone else is online.
There's no one else online other than staff and Commissioner Woodward.
So, hearing none, then I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing at 7:26 and bring that to discussion at the commission. So, is there any comments or questions here, the discussion points that folks would like to bring up? Commissioner Woodward, I'm going to be purposeful in just calling out to see if you have anything before we move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner Duval, and I'm fine at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Then at this point in time, I'm looking for a motion to approve the CUP application with the stipulation that the engineering and community development departments in effect do the finding of fact number 6 prior to construction.
Actually, Mr. Chair, before, I did have a point of discussion here. Does anybody have any thoughts about lighting? Should we be looking at lighting, or should we just look at this as an industrial area that's going to be bright? I don't know.
Lighting.
What's that?
I love lighting.
All right.
Look at it on every city. We should.
Well, yeah. And I was thinking at first you were like, I love lighting. No, I see where you're coming from.
I love the discussion of lighting.
Good, excellent. Good. There we go. And this isn't a pristine, dark neighborhood by any chance. It is kind of in my neighborhood a little bit. I walk through it once in a while and that kind of stuff. It's pretty much one of those borderline areas, and our comprehensive plan would say fill it in. It's infill, fill it in. And I don't, our future land use map, I don't think really speaks to that area in this necessity. It sees it as kind of a commercial industrial area, correct? Does anybody have any ideas that should we approach lighting with the condition or anything like that? Or any other thoughts on this?
Open question to the commission?
Yeah.
I'd have to say, quite frankly, that I would be, particularly given the applicant's testimony here, that they would be open to a concept of motion sensing and dimmable lighting here that meets their needs. I think it's appropriate for us to explore where else. So if you want to make that as part of a motion at some point. Any other responses to Commissioner Gorham's question?
This is Commissioner Woodward. I do agree with Commissioner Gorham. I think that meets the goals of the commission, where we're trying to reduce the light pollution in our city.
I agree with you actually on that one.
Can I clarify? I think she said, I just agree. No,
Okay,
I disagree.
good. But I heard disagree.
Maybe if we could ask her to clarify.
Okay, you said you agree, correct?
I agree with Commissioner Gorham.
Excellent, good. I heard you disagree. Very good.
Thank you.
All right.
Other points?
I'm in favor as well. I think that's a good way to lay that out. And if we have agreement, and if there's areas where we can have that. Are you talking about adding that dimmable portion to the motion then?
Yeah. Especially like for the new lighting that would be there.
Yeah, assuming that we would turn this over to staff to use their discretion to come up with a lighting plan, or do we want them to come back to us with a?
I think that's something staff can do. I would just maybe appreciate a little more direction on some verbiage as to what you're looking for, so that we can help Mr. Taylor meet what the intent of the commission is.
Can you verbalize that in a way that what would you want the lighting to do?
To become dimmer after hours, frankly. I think. Would you like? Do you mind? Do you want it to be so if somebody walks through that car lot at 2 a.m, do you want the lights to be bright, or do you think they're not important? How do you see it?
No, I think that for security purposes, I would like them to come up.
Okay.
If there is a motion. But for my purposes, if they dim after 8 o'clock in the evening, go to half.
Yeah.
That's just fine.
Very good. That's what I was looking for. Then I'm prepared to make a motion that we approve the CUP, and that we ask staff to develop a lighting plan. And of course, they're going to develop some other things too. They're going to be looking at what the water and different things like this. Included in that will be to come up with a dimmable, request that they have a dimmable light portion of it. My words, I'm kind of struggling with the words here, that we come up, that be included, that the lights would go to half after business hours with a motion detector, because, so you would have the security benefits.
All right. Is there a second on that motion?
And second.
All right, Erickson, second. So again, we have a motion and second with the recommending the approval, but with an additional clarification on the lighting plan to be reviewed by staff. That's with lighting that would be dimmable to half after hours, and motion triggered, if you would, for
That sums
during
it
that
up.
period. David, Director Jansky, does that
That works,
clarify for
Mr.
you?
Chair.
Okay. All right, so any discussion on that motion? All right.
Mr. Chair, if I could
Yes.
add something.
Ms. Woodward, yes.
Just a comment on this for the property owner and for anybody else. With the wildlife sightings that we've had in that area, I think the dimmable lighting with the motion sensor is a fabulous idea, as it might tend to scare off some of the bears and other things that could be wandering through there at night. So I think something that goes to full brightness without causing any harm to wildlife would effectively protect the property pretty well.
Thank you. I thought you were going to add a condition to put trail cams in. I would be, so,
I want to see these bears.
that would be cool. All righty, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, Director Jansky, could you do a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Erickson?
Yes.
Calroos?
Yes.
Woodward?
Yes.
Yeager?
Yes.
Gorham?
Yes.
And Duval?
Yes, that motion carries. And next steps, please, for the applicant, David?
Yes, Mr. Chair, so this CUP recommendation will go before the City Council for formal approval during their regular meeting, Monday, August 2nd at 7:30 PM.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. All righty, with that, we are now going to old business. Item 6A, discussion of findings on sober home regulations, and City Attorney Langle, thank you for being here tonight and staying with us for this previous two items on the agenda. David, could you cue us up, please, on this? I think we've got the general gist here.
Mm-hmm. So, again, this is coming back third time around. During your discussion, or say during the City Council's discussion on June 7th, after you all held a informal public hearing on this issue back in May, the City Council motioned to send the issue back to you as the Planning Commission to consider the issue of sober homes. We also directed the city attorney to work with you to identify what the city can regulate regarding sober homes, and then that you would, upon working with the attorney, issue a recommendation back to the City Council. On June 17th, we brought it back for your consideration just to add any other questions you might have of Attorney Langle as he and his staff researched this issue. Again, now attached to my memo is a memo from Mr. Langle, who went through all your different questions and attempted to answer them. And from there, Mr. Chair, I would recommend just turning it over to Mr. Langle to kind of walk you through his findings.
Yes, thank you. So Attorney Langle.
Good evening, Chair, members of the commission. So the memorandum, I don't want to go through that verbatim, I think, unless you have specific questions about it, but more at the sort of 30,000 foot level, if you will, if I want to just talk about that for a couple minutes here. So sober homes, they're not, as it indicated in the memo, they're not specifically mentioned in any state law. What you're really talking about here are dwellings that are used by a particular group of people that are protected by federal law, and those are people who are deemed disabled, and they are disabled by virtue of the fact that they have an addiction. The law does not apply to people who are currently abusing drugs or alcohol.
They are excluded, but it does apply to anyone who is suffering from an addiction and is not using. And then I put in the memo here, what constitutes a sober home. You have to be a dwelling, they have to be disabled, there has to be a nexus. The nexus piece is important because it really impacts a lot of this discussion. And it's what differentiates these types of homes from, say, boarding houses and other places. The home atmosphere, the fact that they live in a family-style setting is seen as a critical part of this whole thing. And that's what gets them into the residential areas. That's what entitles them, in a way, to the accommodations that they seek. It's what entitles them to make the requests about if there are regulations as to what constitutes a family, if there are regulations as to how many people can be in a house, if there are regulations as to even, spacing requirements between these homes. The whole piece about the nexus, they're disabled people who need to have that family atmosphere in order for the addiction treatment to work. And that's why they want to be in the single-family homes. That's why they want the single-family homes to be in the neighborhoods. It is a normal place to be, and that underscores and supports their treatment, their addiction treatment. So, and courts have recognized that nexus. And so it's important, not just for the Planning Commission, but for the public in general, to understand that that's why they're there. That's why they're not looking to generally go into business districts or industrial, those types of places. They're nationwide, they're looking for residential areas for a very particular reason. And because of that, it makes it very difficult, frankly, to regulate them, because what's the tact? What exactly are you regulating that is not a regulation that is specifically directed to or has the impact of regulating specifically disabled people, which you can't do because that violates federal law. So, there's a lot of literature out there about, there are communities, for example, in California where much of the community is turned into so-called sober homes. And they range from very high-end homes, beachfront properties, to destitute structures in poverty-stricken slums of American cities. There's a huge range there. And there's literature out there talking about how it's difficult to regulate, and it's difficult for cities to be able, through a regulatory structure, to differentiate between legitimate sober homes, where people are in fact being treated, between those and homes where landlords are just renting out bedrooms, trying to make a buck, a lot of bucks, in fact, and there is no... There might be some addicted people there, but that's not why they're there. They're just there renting out bedrooms, and they're cramming people in, often many people in, and it's making a lot of money for the landlord. So some cities have really struggled with that, trying to differentiate between the legitimate, illegitimate, and so forth, because from a regulatory standpoint, it's very difficult to reach out to some and not others, and try to eliminate or reduce the number of illegitimate ones. I don't think it's a stretch to say that federal law, because the Fair Housing Act takes in the American Disabilities Act definitions and so forth, I don't think it's a stretch to say that these homes are quite protected, okay? So any attempt to regulate them has to be done very carefully and with a great deal of forethought. an understanding that even if you did that, that doesn't mean that you are going to be immune from challenge. They can argue that while on the face the regulation seems fine, as applied it is discriminatory, and that is a legitimate argument under the Fair Housing Act. Their other tact is to, when they'll ask for an accommodation, to some sort of regulation, accommodation meaning exception, to a regulation, and if that accommodation is denied, a court is going to look at that very closely to see why. What's your rationale for denying that exception to your city code? And was that denial based upon some sort of even unintentional discriminatory intent? The members of this planning commission, or the members of the city council don't have to have an ounce of discriminatory intent for a court to find that in effect there is discriminatory intent. So just so we're clear on that point. So anyway, it's ultimately, my point is it's very difficult to regulate these. And one other thing, there's this petition floating around there. People don't want another home in that little neighborhood. I understand it. The courts have made it very clear that if a municipality imposes regulations or makes accommodation decisions based upon neighbors or neighborhoods, their ire, their dislike, their fears, if that's the basis for it, it's going to get shot down. Okay, that is discriminatory. Because you can have 1,000 people in this room saying we don't want a bunch of addicts in our neighborhood. The court sees that and just translates it. We don't want disabled people in our neighborhood. And then the city acts on it, and you're found to be in violation of the Fair Housing Act. So I understand there's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of, and they may have some very valid points. Why two in one little tiny neighborhood? Why us? Why on all these different things? Understand that. But again, it's a protected purpose, and you really have to, and they have to, get their ducks in a row if they really want to try to have an impact on how and where these types of uses come up in a city. And in that respect, and the reason why I cited St. Paul several times in this memorandum is that the tack that they've taken, kind of two different things. One, if it's fewer than, I think, 6 people, it's hands off. It's too few adults in the one home to consider them to be an impact on a neighborhood, okay? That's where they drew the line. More than that, they started looking at the one issue they really started looking at, and they try to be objective about this because you have to be, is parking. St. Paul's obviously a dense city. It's got very old neighborhoods. And on-street parking is, in some places, at a premium. There's no place to park. And so the rationale was, well, you can have a sober home on any given block, but you can't basically have 2 of them. That's the 330 foot or whatever it is separation requirement. Because once you get them that close, now the 2 together are impacting the neighborhood in an objective fashion. The characteristic of the neighborhood can then be changed from and this is kind of similar to the argument you heard about school, change from a residential neighborhood to a more of a multifamily or even commercial type of neighborhood. And the argument is that sort of impact can be acknowledged under the Fair Housing Act. It's just that you can't do it in a manner that discriminates against the disabled. So the argument there being, St. Paul's a big city. There are thousands of blocks in St. Paul. So if we tell people you can't have two of these in the same city block, it's not like the city is telling them you can't be here. What we're telling you is you just need to space this out a little bit. Don't all go in the same spot and have this impact where you start changing the character of the neighborhood. That argument can work, but even, and this is a big but on that thing, even that argument in some cases has been shot down. Because some courts will still say, okay, we get it, but you're still telling people they can't live where they want to live because they have a disability. Yeah, I mean, it's tough to get around that. In St. Paul, I believe that sober homes are also put in with other types of facilities, group homes, licensed facilities, and so forth, and that same type of, and by doing that, it's not being applied just against sober homes. I don't think that the city of Brainerd really licenses or deals with those other types of facilities. So here in the city of Brainerd, you're really dealing with a blank slate, right? You don't have regulations about sober homes. You don't have regulations about, I don't think about other types of licensed facilities so much. And so there's not a lot to work with in terms of trying to lump different types of integrated housing together and make regulations about them and make findings about them and so forth. So, if the city has a desire to look into ways in which these types of uses can be regulated, it's going to take some work. It's going to take some thought, perhaps some studies about what avenues you have and what you don't have, and whether it's even worth it to do all that. How big of a problem is this really going to be, I guess? And understanding that it's not difficult for a property owner or a member or resident, really, of one of these homes to bring a claim in federal court under the Fair Housing Act. Like I said before, the act, the way that it's written and the way that it's been interpreted, they've got a leg up going into that action. I mean, they just do. So you have to really be careful in terms of how much effort you want to put into this and where you want to go with it. Not saying it can't be regulated, but you have to tread pretty lightly. So, happy to answer any questions about any specific issues that were raised by you folks that I responded to in the memorandum.
Mr. Chair.
Director Jansky.
If I understand one thing, this has nothing to do with what Mr. Langle just presented, kind of more taking that all in. My recommendation to you as a commission tonight is that if you do decide you do want to proceed on some kind of regulatory manner, would be again to be making a recommendation or kind of sending this back to the council saying, here's what Mr. Langle, Attorney Langle, researched and presented to us. Here's kind of in general concepts what we believe we should do. Do you want us to proceed in this? Because of the concerns that Mr. Langle presented of this might be a more drawn out process, not kind of a one and done, something we can potentially handle tonight, which would cost more time of Attorney Langle's time. This isn't covered under his retainer. So my recommendation would be anything you kind of decide tonight, kind of send that back to the city council saying, here's what was done, here's what we're thinking, do you want us to proceed? That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. Questions of Attorney Langle? I have a couple, just trying to reconcile some of the numbers details of of the St. Paul ordinance, I was finding different numbers in their sort of an application packet. They speak to the definition being more than 4 rather than 6. I don't know if that's, 4 is 4 and 6 are numbers that are common in our ordinance. One being definition of family, and the other is relating to state licensed residential facilities. Those are sort of some threshold pieces in our ordinance, and so I'd be wanting to think about that number piece as it relates to what we currently have in our ordinance, and how that does not or could apply. The other is the parking. Seems like the ordinance application was mentioning 1.5 spaces for every 4 adult residents, which outwardly looks like that was a reasonable accommodation example, where I think the standard is 1.5 off-street parkings per unit, and so it seems like that's a demonstration of how a reasonable accommodation could work in these examples. So there were a couple there I wasn't quite sure the discrepancy in those numbers. Did you run across the 4 occupants and the 4 adults or 1.5 parking spaces per 4 adults? Does that?
I'd have to look back at, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, in terms of the parking. My recollection was they had a number of so many units of so much parking per person in this type of facility off-street. And again, that was to alleviate the on-street issue.
Right.
Because that was the one area, the one sort of thing that the city could grab onto and work with, right? Because that's been acknowledged that, okay, these things can have impacts on neighborhoods, and you're not required to allow your entire neighborhood to change just because of this. It's just that there's a balance there between that sort of regulatory structure and the accommodations requirements. And the parking is one of those things where accommodations have historically been sought by these facilities, right? Under the theory that this type of facility has all adults in them, and they're going to have potentially a higher clustering of cars there. Some don't. Some of these folks don't have cars, period. But that is a common request for an accommodation. The 4 versus 6 people deal, the 4 being the number that's often used in the definition of a family. Again, a very common request for accommodation in terms of what defines a family. And certainly my sense is that the courts have no problem saying that definition is out the window, and that it is entirely reasonable and expected that a municipality will allow that to go by the wayside in order to accommodate this type of facility, because it's, the whole idea is that these folks act as a family even though they're not related. And in terms of the number that are allowed in the home, there are court decisions saying, look, if the building inspector is forced to testify under oath and the building inspector says, okay, this is a 4-bedroom house, can handle 8 people in it or whatever, then that's the number. Don't try to give me a smaller number, because you've got no physical basis for the smaller number, and any attempt to go smaller looks like you're just trying to do it to keep down the number of handicapped people. So, the family definition involving number 4 is routinely swept away. The 6, where you've got that threshold between unlicensed and licensed, I think the city of St. Paul utilized that threshold in their ordinance to distinguish between what we're going to try, what they're going to try to regulate minimally, and what they're not. And there's some logic to that, right? So, because it puts these facilities in the same sort of basket as other facilities that are licensed because there's 6 people or more. And so they're getting the same sort of information from them. They're getting the same, they're treating them kind of the same way. Because they're treating them the same way, it doesn't look like there's not discrimination against them because of that disability.
And I think your point of City of St. Paul kind of looking for those parallel kinds of things in the ordinance that help them to think about this issue in a common way.
Right.
And I appreciate the number 4. I would say I would agree with you that it's not a starter, but I think that's where it was in the definition in St. Paul gets me thinking about they're just simply recognizing right off the bat that we're not going to sit here and monkey around with that number 4 because we will set it at some level in your definition.
Right.
But right now, we can think about why it is that it's 4 versus 6, but I think that's a place where we could have conversation around where is it that the city might be interested in saying we have to think differently at certain thresholds and stuff. David, it looks like you have a question. And
I just want to make a quick comment too, Mr. Chair. As Mr. Langle also was talking about when it came to the parking, I think St. Paul, one of the things they looked at with the parking was, again, like we have some pretty highly dense neighborhoods. Their neighborhoods are even more highly dense than ours. And they have already had some existing parking restrictions. And that's where they said, like, there isn't anywhere to park as it is. So if the city of Brainerd were to look at potentially putting in parking restrictions, my guess is and Mr. Langle can comment on this, is if we wanted to back it up in court, we would need to prove that there is a parking problem right now, existing already. Not that, or that a parking problem will result if we allow a sober home with more than X number of people, which would require some study. I don't know.
Or within so many feet of another sober.
With another sober home. Again, that's where I would say my guess is we would have to probably do some precursor study work on that in order for it to potentially meet legal muster.
And St. Paul did all that legwork first. I mean, they undertook the effort to come up with, I don't know that I have it here, yeah, I do. They went through and came up with what's entitled the St. Paul Sober House Zoning Study back in 2008. And, it's a 21-page report on all of this, including, a lot of detail about the impact of parking and why it makes sense in these neighborhoods to have a distance requirement and what that means in terms of you can't then build another house within, or not build another house, create another sober house within so many feet of a house. And there was at one point there's a proposal in the study or a suggestion that if it's a property with 7 or more residents, that they would have a 660-foot setback in there. Now, as the ordinance was adopted, that was dropped out, and they only adopted the 330-foot piece. But yeah, to his point, they did all this homework first in an attempt to not only flesh out the issues for purposes of the public, but also to bolster any arguments that they may have to make coming down the line in the event somebody complains. And I know that when this first came out, this ordinance first came out, there were sober home advocates that just flat out said, well, this violates the Fair Housing Act. But I'm not aware that anybody ever took it far enough that there was a court decision on it, so.
So, another question I would have is or maybe seeking your opinion, would it make sense to have a formal process to be able to separate out the legitimate FFHA qualifying sober houses from the opportunistic landlord that is looking to shoehorn tenants in that don't meet the city's definition of four persons exceed the city's definition of four persons unrelated, which is in our current rental statute. Would it benefit us to have a formal process to be able to have that request for accommodation in writing, like St. Paul has, sort of you define out how the ordinance doesn't meet your current needs and what your request of the city is, and then that's brought back and processed either at the staff level. I don't think it comes to a commission or anything, but does it make sense to you to have a formal process to receive a request and handle them almost on an individual basis? Or would it make more sense to just categorically say that if it is a sober home use, we're not gonna in any way entertain any other considerations of it. It just exists. Do you understand kind of what the nature of the question?
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, I think, I mean, a couple of things. One is there enough of an issue right now to warrant having a process? Are you regulating something that's not an issue? And then number two, assuming that the answer to that is, yeah, it's enough of an issue, we need to think about that, then certainly having a process is helpful just because it creates that method or manner of getting certain information in the hands of the city, right? Because otherwise, I mean, if somebody claims, well, your ordinance as you're trying to enforce it, and I'm not sure what ordinance it would be that would be enforced against them, but as enforced is a violation of the Fair Housing Act because this is a sober home. Well, if you don't have a form to go back with them against, okay, well, if you're making that argument, I need you to fill out this form because what you're asking for then is an accommodation. And by having that form, it creates that mechanism whereby you obtain certain information. And that's helpful, just because you may not get it otherwise. You may not get everything that you want unless there's going to be a lot of back and forth. It's just a more functional means of obtaining information that frankly you need anyway to determine whether you need to make an accommodation.
Right.
It creates the record, the paper trail.
Are there other folks that have questions or thoughts on this? Ms. Woodward, I'm going to reach out just to check in with you.
Are we able to put sober homes underneath the same regulation as assisted living facilities, or is there there's no, if I'm correct, there's no licensing agency for sober homes, right?
No.
To my knowledge, there's not
Okay.
a true licensing entity.
So there wouldn't really be a way to put them under the same heading or the same category as licensed care facilities.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Woodward, I don't know about putting them underneath the same category. it's more along the lines of, with respect to certain regulations, be it parking or something else, you might group things together, sober homes with other types of licensed facilities. Assisted living facilities, given their size, I don't know that that's really an analogous type of facility, I guess. I'm thinking more of some a typical day treatment or treatment facility that has, 7 to 16 or whatever the number is, resident patients, whatever. Whereas an assisted living facility tends to be a much larger commercial type operation, I guess.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Okay.
Ms. Woodward, does that get at your question?
Yeah.
Director
Yeah,
Chansky
that-
would like to add a point here that might further that. If
And I just
can.
want to add, so for example, in our R2 zoning, so in R1, where the current 3 are all located, actually I think one's in a B1, but still single family, it does permit by right residential care facilities serving 6 or fewer persons. I think first of all it goes back, I just want to make a comment first, it goes back to Attorney Langel's comment about that nexus. The difference there is they just happen to be facilities where multiple people live who need services, and more out of economies of scale thing. It's easier than you only have to have 1 or 2 people who can serve all of them staff wise. But the care of a resident isn't dependent on another resident. Versus a sober home, as he said, the idea is all the residents work, essentially keep each other accountable, and that's how they get their treatment, is through other residents and other addicts. But going back to, like, for example, our R2, we do have conditional uses for, where did it go? I just lost it. Am I looking at R2 or am I looking at R1? That's the problem, I'm looking at R1. Let me go back to R2. For nursing homes and similar group housing, not including hospitals, in that situation, the conditions are side setbacks are doubled. The site shall be served as an arterial or collector street of sufficient capacity to accommodate traffic. Again, I think assuming here we're talking tens of people, dozens of people. All state statutes and regulations governing such uses are strictly adhered to. Off-street parking is provided. Off-street loading areas are provided. Again, the assumption is we're talking dozens of residents. Same thing for senior housing. They say not more than 20% of the occupants, maybe it was 55. Talk about, again, age there, because again, it's definitely senior housing. Off-street parking, off-street loading. Parking areas shall be screened and landscaped from view from surrounding abutting residential districts. Elevator service and usable open space. Again, the assumption here is we're talking dozens of residents, not, between 6 and 10. And it's going to be a high intensity use. That's how our ordinance currently regulates those types of uses.
Mr. Chair, real quick.
Yes,
I have
Mr.
a
Yeager.
question for Mr. Langle, if I could, please. Mr. Langle, do you know if any other municipalities have this form that we were just talking about, that we could use as a platform, potentially, if we were going to go down that avenue? I would think that the form itself would have to be very intelligently crafted, because I could see how the form itself could very easily drift into discrimination just by concept. Do you know if there is one in existence, or if somebody else is using one in existence that has successfully navigated the discrimination?
Well, the form may be fairly open-ended. I don't know of one off the top of my head. It may be that St. Paul, Burnsville, there were a couple other cities that came up that address sober homes. We'd have to do some digging to see if we can find one. Yeah.
Because I absolutely think that a valid part of this whole conversation is who gets to say they're a sober home. I mean, there has to be some mechanism in my mind to qualify for that, but I'm very curious on how we would wordsmith a document or some type of government form that would.
And that is an ongoing problem. I mean, it absolutely is.
So the city of St. Paul does have the request for reasonable accommodation form, which is broad. But then they have a sober house addendum that specifically asks very targeted questions to get at that family unit function, which is the way to peel off the opportunistic landlord, right?
So there is one. You.
Yeah, I can hand that down to you, but it's.
There you go.
Perfect.
So, so again, you can kind of weed out the
Right.
opportunists that are trying to exploit this thing in this
Right.
fair housing piece here that allows them to say, well, I can exceed the city's rental housing.
The density rules, yeah.
Right. So I mean it's basically getting the fact checking out there. So. If I may, and I apologize, I need to basically call a brief recess if I can, so maybe 3-minute recess and be back, so apologize for that.
You want to see this, Joe?
I'm gonna keep it.
You break it.
Same one that I just found. I want to see if it's the same one that I just found. Yep, that's the same one. I just found it on Brainerd. And what was the Brainerd? What is on front of it?
Yeah, so here, so this is the generic, and there's the lighter.
I want nothing to do with this. I can tell you that right now.
I'm not sitting in Minneapolis. The city of Minneapolis in their conference said, we're not in business of finding families. You got 8 people, you say your family. How I can take that way. I like that approach. Sure. Sure, your family. Who am I to say you're not family?
But it's gonna be many more hours though.
I'm a household of 6, and at least half of us are addicted.
Yeah, there you go.
They should be after anyone.
Yeah, you're an unsober house.
We're quality, we're unsober.
Frat house. We're putting a double secret probation.
Exactly.
Shut you down. Like gambling. Double secret probation. Yeah. Time of year after meetings, then at the summer. I had a meeting at 5, so I'm on my second one.
All right, back in session, thank you. And Mr. Erickson.
So the form, so I mean, I like that concept, something to explore. And I was gonna say, it's kind of, in one sense, it's a filter, but it's also to protect the integrity of the services that's being provided by what would be deemed the legitimate sober homes too. So I see that as being something that, one, it's a filter, but also it protects the integrity of the sober homes that are functioning as the intended purpose.
Mr. Duvall, what are the
Mr. Guam.
questions in the form? I hear about this form. What are the questions that are
Sorry.
being asked?
Being passed around.
I hear interest in this.
So they do have, interestingly, as you'll see, a generic form request for reasonable accommodation.
Thank you.
But then you'll see they also have a, which I haven't found yet online, but they also have a addendum specifically for sober homes.
Are you able to share that screen so that Commissioner Woodward might be able to see that as well?
Yeah, give me just a second. Lori, can you change it on that project I'm plugged into the HDMI. Can you change it to mine?
If it's easier, you can email it to me too.
Or I can go over to the computer and change it, Lori. So that the WebEx projects my, versus me sharing my screen on WebEx, because I think that would be. Huh?
Mr. Chair, while we're
Mr.
waiting,
Erickson.
I do like what Mr. Chansky said about having something to take to council, whether it's I guess an update, but just an action item too. 'Cause I know that they're gonna be curious. So I don't know what that is, but.
And we're exploring a form to filter, other than that.
Can you change it on the
And
WebEx
an explanation
to
of the
Lori?
reasons why.
Yeah.
Why don't we regulate it? Well,
Here's why.
Okay, so.
Because Joe said so.
So this is the form, the regular request for accommodation form. You know, applicant name, address, supporting information. This is a one-page form. And I'm trying to find and this is their sober house addendum, which just asks a few more questions. This is done by the zoning administrator. Are residents placed in the house by an outside entity? Can a resident live in this house indefinitely? Does the resident have access to the entire house, including all household facilities such as kitchen, common area, bathrooms? Does the whole house function as a single household unit where the residents share in common duties such as cleaning and general maintenance of the house? Do the house residents make decisions in a democratic manner regarding the operation of the house? Do house residents have input in reviewing and accepting new residents? Does the house have a written policy banning alcohol and controlled substance use and possession by residents? Do services or meetings relate to the residents' recovery take place at the house? Are any of these services or meetings open to persons not residing in the sober house? Generally, do residents go through alcohol or controlled substance treatment programs prior to arrival at the house? And then you attach a copy of these. I will say I would have to do some research. I'm assuming they have an administrative policy on how you administrate this because should they say no to any of these, I don't know how their zoning administrator would go, well, then you're not a sober house. Again, you have to be careful on, you know, if they check no to too many things, does that make them no longer a sober house? I don't know. So again, at minimum though, to Attorney Langle's point, it would cause a paper trail. Right now, kind of going a refresher on how we regulate them, they just get a rental license and say they're a sober house and it's a single unit. And then right now, how density in the house occupancy is determined is based off of room size. Do they have enough room? Does the fire marshal say, yes, that's an acceptable amount of people to have? Because a building official and fire marshal say that's an acceptable amount of people to have in that home. So what we would probably end up doing if we adopted something like this is keep that rental license piece, or at least I would recommend we keep that rental license piece, because that allows us to inspect and things. But then they would have to also fill out an addendum like this saying we are a sober home and have this paper trail. It's not necessarily putting new restrictions on them, but then we actually have something that stated, yes, they said, yes, I'm a sober home.
Well, this form is an addendum to their accommodation request.
Right.
So in St. Paul, they're not getting this form just whenever they open up the house. They only get it when they want to do something that does not comport with their existing city code. So as I understand it, Mr. Chansky, right now you have to get a rental license, that's fine. But if they want to exceed, for example, the number of people that the building inspector says can go in there, or if there's some other regulation. Right now you don't have, I don't know if there are any. That's my point before. I'm not sure what regulations you have in the first place that impact them. You don't have parking regulations, for example, right now. So it's like, what are they gonna ask an accommodation for?
Right, exactly.
And-
City of Brainerd, if it's this wide open at this point.
And as right now, for the sober homes that we do know we have, what they've done is anytime they wanted to add space, is they've come in, they get a building permit because they have to remodel the house, and the building official determines, okay, they say we're gonna have this many people in this bedroom, and they say, well, per our code, the rental code describes minimum sizes. You know, fire marshal reviews it, and if they meet those requirements, again, they can have it. They aren't requesting accommodation, but requesting accommodation would be like, the code says I can have 2 in this bedroom, but I actually want to have 4.
Right.
That would have to be a request for accommodation.
And I think that kind of code requirement is fine because it's based on a health and safety rationale. You know, you don't want people crammed into too small of a living space. And frankly, those square footages they're not very big in the first place. But I think that kind of a regulation would stand up if the city were to say, well, no, we're not, look, you know, you're only required to have so many square feet per additional person in a bedroom. It's not a big number. I mean, this is like, I don't want to say that it's, you know, jail cell size, but it's not a big number. And if you have a building inspector or fire marshal willing to testify that I'm not comfortable going lower than that, putting more people into a smaller space because it makes it more difficult for them to get out in the event of an issue or whatever, then I think that's probably supportable. It's probably a situation where an accommodation denial might actually hold up. But again, it's got to be based on the health and safety type stuff, not some other reason. So going back to the other point, I'm not sure what they're asking for an accommodation for that would give rise to the need to fill out the form.
Because at this time, the sober house in Tyrol is not in conflict with any part of our city code, right? So this is really, it's like a non-issue, really, right? I mean,
I would say right now there's the one element of the code that you could potentially argue they need accommodation. I know Commissioner Duval's brought up is in our rental code we talk about the 4 persons.
Oh, non-related.
But with that being said, I think Attorney Langle's comments earlier would say, well, do they even need to fill out a form because the courts have said, well, we expect you to waive that without essentially any question. So then the question is, do we even need a form to say, I'm going to go over 4 people? You could.
I don't think there's anything wrong with using the form in that scenario, telling them, you know, we've got this definition of family, and they're going to come back and say, well, as you know, city, we don't need to follow that definition under the Fair Housing Act. All right, you're probably right. But what you're asking for is an accommodation. We're not saying we're not going to give it to you. We're just asking for the paper trail to show and to do this. And we're asking for it so that we have it on record that you're a legitimate sober house and it's an appropriate accommodation to do this, as to distinguish from other scenarios that may crop up that call themselves sober houses but are not, but can cause a stink in the community. I mean, it's to protect, frankly, the real sober houses as well. They don't want to be maligned or put in the group of the non-legitimate ones that create a mess, right? So it's to their benefit to have the illegitimate ones weeded out as well, I would think.
Thank you. Are there other thoughts or feedback on the information that Attorney Langle has put together for us? Well, hearing none, Question for you, Director Chansky. Do you want some time to look over that application process, look over the administrative side of that, and perhaps report back to the commission as one option here?
That would be appreciated, and I can come back and say, you know, I've reviewed it, this is how they work with it. Yeah, again, my biggest question, you know, I think their initial form is pretty straightforward. They don't ask for too much. And then when it comes to the other questions, you know, kind of maybe why those questions, how does this all work? Again, I think part of it is under that understanding, what would take it, I guess my comment would, what would take a denial? Because that's the biggest concern, is if you deny it, what are your tangible reasons to deny this? And then what are the biggest concerns this city has? So, yeah, having this is the first I've seen this form. This is the time to look over it and try to really figure out what they were getting at with this form, and potentially even reach out to some people in St. Paul and look at, okay, how do you work with this form? How do you work with it? How do you administer it?
And then maybe another question for Attorney Langle. If the city goes down the path of saying, why don't we have this addendum or the special accommodation and the addendum associated, is it in the city's interest, or would the city then want to have a definition of a sober home? So is there you're having this process and it talks about this, do we need to have a definition of a sober home in our ordinance to be able to anchor it and differentiate again from an opportunistic landlord?
Chair Duvall, I think that I don't know that it's necessary for purposes of the accommodations form, because all those questions really get to whether it's a sober home or not. If you were to create regulations that specifically deal with sober homes, like parking, for example, then it would be necessary to define them. But right now, I would envision, like, say somebody wants to open up a new one. They got to come in, they got to get a rental license. Presumably, hopefully, they would have a conversation with planning staff, well, this is going to be a sober home. Okay. Well, then I'm assuming that you're not going to have 4 people in there that are in the same family, because that's contradictory to the concept. So I'm going to give you this accommodations form, and you need to fill it out. And that brings in all that information from them at that time. I don't think you need a definition of sober home in your ordinance for that. I think you just need to get that form filled out. Might as well get it done at the time that you issue the rental license application. Get it all in. You've got it in your file. Now we've got the information to determine that it is in fact a sober home. We're going to issue the accommodation as a matter of course, because you've met the criteria under federal law as to what a sober home is, and that's the end of it.
Okay. Thank you. All right, is there any other questions or any points of clarity that folks would like to make? Commissioner Woodward, I'm reaching out to you just as a check-in.
Thank you. Nothing at this time.
Okay. All right. Well, then I think at this point, David, if you would explore the form and the administrative process and come back to us on our August 18th meeting, and we'll just have just an update from you on that process, and then from there, I think we can begin to provide that check-in with City Council.
Works for me.
All righty, so that brings us then to, and thank you, Attorney Langle, appreciate your work here and allowing us to kind of just pick your brain a little bit here, more than just a little bit. Thank
Hey,
you.
you're welcome. Happy to do it.
Thank you. So that brings us to item 8 on the agenda, public forum. Do we have anybody?
No one online other than
Okay,
Commissioner
well,
Woodward and staff.
Open and closed, 8:30. And so at this point, we're at the Community Development Director's report. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got 2 things tonight, both related to the zoning code update. We held a workshop with the city council on July 12th to present the annotated outline that went before the planning commission on June 26th. And then we came back to them on July 19th, Monday, with a resolution to adopt said annotated outline. The council did have some objections. We left the workshop assuming we thought we had answered some of their concerns. They seemed in support. Got them to the council. I had also issued in between that workshop and Monday's council meeting another just an email hoping to further address some of the comments and concerns that they had. Unfortunately, I think there was a bridge that needed to be a gap that needed to be bridged between what the planning commission and staff were recommending and what the council understood. And I'm sure Commissioner Erickson from the council's perspective can also share some things. In that I think there was some understanding or feeling that by adopting the annotated outline, again, they felt like they were thinking, okay, we approve this in concept, comes to the 19th, we have a resolution adopting the 24-page annotated outline. They felt like, well, this isn't concept, this is 24 pages of black and white. Even though from, I think, our perspective, this is conceptual, this is the document that informs the new zoning code, it's not the zoning code. The council felt otherwise. What they did end up motioning was a motion along the lines of, whereas the annotated outline recommends the transition of the adopted zoning code to a hybrid character-based zoning code to better align with the 2035 comprehensive plan. At this time, we're still trying to figure out exactly what that means and what direction were we actually given from the council. There was some discussion on potentially having us bring something back. Didn't necessarily make it into the motion. Are we authorized to go start writing language? Right now, I've already met once with Jennifer Haskamp and Mike Lamb on yesterday to discuss it. We're having another meeting tomorrow to kind of figure out, okay, what's the best way to move forward, try to get the council back on board as much as possible so that we can keep going down this path and ensuring that they're kind of on board moving forward and understanding what the planning commission's vision, as you're the ones who've been working on it for the last 9 months. So I will keep you updated on how we're going to be moving forward. Hopefully we'll make some headway tomorrow after Jennifer Bergman and I meet with Jennifer Haskamp and Mike Lamb. One thing the council did do, yes.
David, if
Could I
you
just
could.
add in?
Absolutely,
Here.
please do.
It was a confusing little bit. And I think my impression of the concerns that other council members had was, I think that they were looking, coming out of the workshop, I think that they were looking for, I think they thought they were going to be just kind of given a thumbs up on, yep, you're on the right track as far as the annotated outline. I think the resolution just kind of solidified things too much. I think they were thinking, they don't want to approve. I think they're saying, and I think they're technically correct, that approving the resolution says you're approving this as stated. And versus, as we understood from the work that we've done with the consultants, that the character names would be changing, and it was just that an outline. So I think the resolution language, the resolution itself, that level was concerning. And then just more discussion on, I know Mike O'Day brought up the T123. It seems like a ranking. And didn't want to sign on to ranking neighborhoods in that. So I think we need to do more work on the naming of the character, which I think even at the last time we met with the consultants, we talked about that in, downtown core. So more massaging on that.
We go with colors.
So one of the comments that I had initially with Mike and Jennifer yesterday, we'll see. I know Mike I got one email back from Mike. He has watched that video at least 3 to 4 times in the last 24 hours from that night to kind of understood what happened. Is one potential avenue we may go down is meeting with the council and almost doing a step back and doing what we did with you early on in the process, where we kind of did like create the bubbles of the neighborhood of, how would you section out this community, and then what would you call those areas? And maybe that's just part of maybe again helping them understand how you as a commission got to the character areas as they were presented. That might be one avenue. Again, we're just kind of spitballing right now of what does the council need to help them understand what the commission's done over the last 9 months so we can keep moving forward.
Mr. Erickson.
2 really quick things. So one, with my work at Region 5, having done the comprehensive planning a little bit different, but having been on that side, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I think the consultants are also looking for just kind of that direction, approving this before we move on to develop, further developing. So with that, do we have to have it as a resolution? Because I think bringing it down a level might ease
I don't
a
think,
lot of concerns.
and I think the reason they looked at for the resolution, honestly, was that element of not trying to handcuff the council, but so that as we move into one, it is their thumbs up, but also as we move into language, and if they ask, like, wait a minute, what is this language about? How did you get here? They can come back and said, remember this 24-page document that we said this is going to be our guiding document that you approved? So it does kind of officially fence things, and also it also gives the council a sword, if you want to put it, some fencing. Them saying, if language comes way off, they can be like, no. Remember we approved this guidelines, and what you did was not in this guidelines. So it works both ways of protecting staff from council way changing their mind later, but also protects council from staff running amok. You can say, no, rein you back in. We said this is what we agreed to in this document. And so I think from Jennifer and Mike's concern right now, why they do want to try to come back to council and solidify something is the concern is if we start writing language right away, and then we come back to council and be like, hey, here's some language you drafted, council going, no. And then we've just wasted time, and time equals money on the direction that the council didn't like. So that was part of the resolution, was the idea of council, you're acknowledging the direction we're going, and we know from a staff perspective what you want from us too. So it went kind of both ways. And I think right now the concern is that we don't know what the council actually wants.
Maybe question, Alderman Erickson, I'm going to ask you to change your hat to the liaison role. Do you sense that that council fully understands the project timeline? Because it seemed in the conversation that when you come back, we'll comment some more in January, when sort of January's the product is delivered in our timeline, and whether they're thinking we've got another 6 months of.
Yeah, likely not, as far as the timeline. And then I think going back to what Mr. Jansky was saying too, again, I would encourage them to maybe pump the brakes on the resolution. Again, we're already kind of going back and forth, so we're losing time there.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't need the resolution, I think that would help put the council at ease as far as, the comment was made, I don't want to put my name on that. Well, I think, that's the, they're not wanting to take any official action on it. They want to
And
kind of
from
give
that
direction.
perspective, I think they were willing to maybe back off on the resolution. But at the same time, I think a good analogy that kind of came out of this was, with any project, detours are expected. But but I think the concern was we took a detour, but weren't given the map to the detour and the assurance that the end result is the same. So that's, I think, what they're looking for is detours are fine, but we want the map to the detour and to know what the council's desire for the end result is. And if it's different than the current destination, then we need to know that the destination has changed.
Yeah, and I think coming out of the workshop too, I felt like there was agreement about that end destination. Again, knowing that knowing that things are going to change throughout the process. I think that got hung up on the resolution.
And so that's why we're
Okay,
going to be
going
meeting
back to
again
it. So,
tomorrow. And that's good to know from your perspective that maybe drop the resolution and maybe come back a slightly different angle.
You know, I know we did the workshop, but maybe a short presentation to council on the, basically it's the concept from the Euclidean zoning to a form-based and just what that, and we're not going full form-based, we're going partial. I know that was covered in the workshop, but a little bit more there might help. Because I think, and in my perspective too, even the questions in the workshop were, I'm thinking about O'Day's comments where he talked about we're trying to take one neighborhood and make all the other neighborhoods that. And I feel like what the form-based does is it goes the opposite. It allows more flexibility for each neighborhood to be its own neighborhood. So I think some more, I don't want to say education on that, but more, information on that would be helpful. Because I think what he's wanting is what the form-based is. So in my sense of it.
So we're going to be working on it. We're going to try to figure out what's the best way to address the concerns and keep us moving at our good pace. So just want to make sure that allow the planning commission to know what occurred on Monday and that we're going to be working through it, and you'll probably be hearing more in the future. The second item, Mr. Chair, quickly, that was also related to this is that the city council did, upon staff and consultant recommendation, hold the first reading of a proposed interim ordinance to institute a moratorium on zoning code text amendments until January 31st of 2022. The purpose of this, we wanted to get this process going because it is an interim ordinance, and per the city charter, we have to have 2 readings before it can be done. The idea here of this is it doesn't mean someone cannot request a change to our ordinance. What it does do is give the city some flexibility to work with someone. So if someone submits an application, there's not these statutory requirements to consider it and make a decision on that. And because we're moving into that phase of writing new language, what we don't want to do is have to amend our current ordinance while we're trying to write a new ordinance. So if someone comes in and says, hey, I would really like, this type of use or something to be considered, we can be having that discussion with them as we're writing the new ordinance language and figure out how does it best fit into the new ordinance language over the time of that, instead of saying you've got 60 days to make a decision, yes, are you going to take this up, or no, are you not going to take this up? So it gives us that flexibility, and that's why we're going to be putting that moratorium in. And it's only for the zoning code. If someone wants to come in and ask us to change the general city code, in another area, they can. It is specifically over to the zoning code for this specific time. Statute does allow the moratoriums to be up to a year with allowances under certain circumstances to go a full 18 months. Right now, we're only requesting 6 months. If come January 31st, our new ordinance isn't done yet, we could consider to extend it if we wanted to. But right now, we felt that our goal is still January 31st of 2022 at the latest, so that's all we're going to ask for at this time. So on the August 2nd meeting, the council will be holding the second reading, they'll hold a public hearing, and then adopt that interim ordinance. So, again, the purpose there is, not to say someone can't request it, but just give the city more flexibility of working with someone who makes a request. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, David. We're on to agenda item 10, Commissioner questions and comments. Do I have anyone with questions and comments?
I have a super quick one.
All right, Mr. Gorham.
Mr. Erickson, at the June workshop, you talked about the idea of that it was important with the Washington rebuild, the Highway 210 project, that that it fits with our comprehensive plan and our values in terms of walkable community, things like this. I think that you brought up some notion like this. Do we want to pursue that and actually have some sort of letter or something like this? I mean, I just so we're on the record of saying we think that this project needs to fit with our comprehensive plan. It needs to fit with our future land use, et cetera, et cetera. That's just all I say. All I'm saying is that maybe we have a chance to weigh in, and maybe we should. Mr. Chansky?
I just want to add that City Engineer Paul Sandy is the city's representative to the 210 reconstruction project at MnDOT. And I will say he has been very clear, and that is the city's stance with them. That doesn't mean the Planning Commission can't add to it, but we have been very clear with MnDOT that we do want to do that. With that also being noted, on August 2nd at 3 or 4. I'm blanking. There actually is going to be a joint meeting of the city council and the county board at which they're going to be presented with some early concepts and options for some reconstruction areas of 210.
Cool.
So we are starting to get to that process of actually seeing some potential options of different areas, what that might look like.
Commissioner Erickson.
I was just going to add that I'm also on that in the capacity of Region 5, so I'm also on that committee with Paul about the 210. But yeah, I think if we wanted to put together some things, I think they're asking for public input. So I don't know if that qualifies from a planning commission, but they're asking for input, community engagement during this time. And so I think now would be the time if we wanted to influence that outcome. I agree.
If the commission would like we can put something in. Commissioner Erickson, do you know when the deadline is on that?
I don't.
Okay. Because I could plan. I don't think it's in the next 30 days. I doubt.
No, I don't think so. I think it's intended to go through the summer and then.
Okay. Because I could put something on the August 18 agenda where if you wanted to draft any findings or recommend letters, and I could draft something that for you to consider and amend and vote on in August if you'd like.
I think that would be helpful to have a draft for us to then be able to kind of fine tune. But I think between the comments of Commissioner Gorham and Commissioner Erickson, I think the high points you've got. So, cool. Is there any other commissioner with questions or comments? And I will call out again Commissioner Woodward if give you that opportunity.
Not at this time, thank you.
All righty. Then, hearing none, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion made.
All right, Gorham, motion, second?
Second, Yeager.
Yeager, all right, all in favor?
Aye.
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I was ready to hit it. We're gonna roll call.
Erickson.
Yes.
Calrus.
Yes.
Woodward.
Yes.
Yeager.
Yes.
Gorham. And Duval.
Yes. Kill it.